Hello and welcome to A Woman's Heart. I'm Lisa Granger. We are beginning to wrap up our summer reading series, and I think you are in for a treat. I spoke with Gabrielle Meyer about her unique time travel books that have been some of my favorite page turners this summer. Gabrielle is a prolific writer and loves history. We had a pleasant conversation about her writing journey and the lessons she has learned along the way. For the complete summer reading list and show notes, go to my website, lisagranger.com. Meanwhile, let's take a trip with Gabrielle Meyer. Welcome to A Woman's Heart. We have Gabrielle Meyer with us today, and I'm very excited because I thoroughly enjoyed her book, and I can't wait to find out more about your journey. Thanks for joining us today, Gabrielle.
Thanks for having me.
You are very welcome. And as I already mentioned to you, my oldest daughter is named Gabrielle. So we already have that in common as far as the name goes.
When I was little growing up, I did not know any other, and I pronounce it Gabrielle with a long A, but I didn't know any other Gabrielles. But now I hear the name all the time and I love it.
Okay. Well, and that hence my mistake, because I refer to my daughter as Gabrielle. So I call her Gabrielle, not Gabrielle, but I will make sure that I make a point of that in the future. And as I mentioned, I am looking forward to getting to know you a little better. So tell us about yourself and something fun that isn't normally in your bio.
Sure. So as I said, I'm Gabrielle Meyer. My friends and family call me Gabe, actually. And I live in central Minnesota, right on the banks of the Mississippi River. I'm married and I have 4 children. Our oldest is going into her second year of college, and then we have a senior in high school this year, and then twin boys who are 14. So something that is not in my bio is that I actually grew up in a carriage house on a historic estate right along the banks of the Mississippi River.
Oh, wow.
Kind of like Sabrina. Yeah. It was not that. I mean, I loved it, but there were no parties, nothing glittering like that. The lady who lived there was an elderly woman.
Okay.
And my dad took care of the property for her. So that was really where my love of history actually stems from, is growing up on that estate.
Wonderful.
And it's still, it's owned by our city today, and there's 2 mansions on it. And I actually rent it out every other year, and I host a writer's event there.
Wow, that's really neat that you still get to go back, and that so now they're historic properties.
Yes, yep.
Okay.
Owned by our city. So one of the mansions is like a museum and the office, and then the other one you can sleep up to 26 people in it. It's quite large.
Wow, yeah. That is quite the mansion. That is a lot of space for 26 people. That's great. That's wonderful. So do they have a little plaque on the carriage house at the former home of Gabrielle Meyer? No?
That would be no, they do not.
Okay, well, I thought I would try. I thought I would ask. Well, thanks.
I could open up there, but they would probably think that was strange.
Yeah, they might. They might not approve, especially if it's historic. If it's a historic property owned by the community now, they kind of frown on just slapping labels on that sort of thing without permission and authorization and all that other good stuff. So, well, Gabrielle, how did you mentioned that your love of history started while you were living in that carriage home. Where did your love of writing start?
So I actually, this is kind of funny. The only class I ever failed was spelling, and it was in 4th grade. And I struggled with spelling, from the very beginning. And it was actually my 3rd grade teacher who said, you know what, I think if we could get you to love reading, you might learn how to spell. And so she asked me what I enjoyed, and I loved babies at the time. And so she brought me into our school library, and she showed me the Babysitter Club series. And that was where my love of stories came from.
Okay.
And so as I got older and I started to mature and read different books, I started to get a passion for my own storytelling. And then when I was a junior in high school, I started working for the Charles Lindbergh Historic Site. And so that's Charles Lindbergh, the aviator who flew across the Atlantic in 1927, grew up in my hometown, and his house is still here. And so I started working there as a tour guide, and that's where I started to love telling historical stories. So stories about real people who have lived, and that kind of all of that combined together has created this desire in me to tell stories inspired by real people and places and things. So
okay, wonderful. That is beautiful, and I know it is a lot of fun to be able to be there and learn the stories behind the people that everybody knows. I mean, I've heard of Charles Lindbergh, but I don't know a whole lot of the stories behind the scenes. So that must be a whole lot of fun. And what are some of the things? I know, most authors do not have the I fell in love and I wrote one story and it was automatically picked up and I made lots of money and it was all smooth sailing.
That was not that's not my story.
That isn't most people's either.
So I started writing in 2012 towards publication. I kind of dabbled before, and I had published a couple of articles for a local magazine. But in 2012 was when I decided to go pursue traditional publication. I knew that I could self-publish, but there was a part of me that kind of wanted that affirmation. And also, it's just a different self-publishing and traditional publishing. There's, pros and cons to all of it.
Yes.
But so I started to go to conferences and met with editors and agents, eventually got an agent in, I think 2013. It's been a while, but 2015 was when my first book was published, and it was a 25,000 word novella. So it was just, I think 50 pages maybe long.
Okay.
But I had already written 3 full-length novels before that and gotten them turned down. So I tell people I wrote over 300,000 words before my first 25,000 words got published. So since 2015, I've actually written for 4 different publishing houses, and I've had, I'm almost up to 40 books published at this point.
Wow.
So it's quite a bit. But it's my Timeless series that has really captured everyone's attention. And my first Timeless book was actually my 25th book published. But a lot of people think it's my first. So it's kind of fun. Because then they find out that there are other books that they can go back and read too.
Yeah, I noticed that when a mutual friend first kind of introduced us and connected us, and I looked at the third in the series was already out, and you suggested maybe start at the beginning because, yes, that one's actually set in my hometown in Colonial Williamsburg. That is one of the stories. And before we get to that, though, I did want to ask, how did your faith play into with your writing and your journey as an author?
So I'm very fortunate. I was born into a Christian family, and so was raised with a very strong, solid foundation. And I found Christian fiction early on when I was probably about 13, and I just devoured it. And I know that a lot of what I read, a lot of the Christian fiction helped to form my faith. And I always say to people, as a person, as a believer, everything that I do is informed by my faith, how I spend my money, how I spend my time, the things I say, the things I do. And so as I pursued writing, have always felt like it was a God-given gift to me. That's something I needed to steward well and honor him with that. And so pursuing it, even through the rejections, was very, very difficult. But a good friend of mine once said, God doesn't call us to write just to publish stories. He calls us to write so that he can shape our hearts. And that's what he was doing, and he still continues to do as I write new stories. And, even after you get published, there are a lot of obstacles that you face. One of them is staying published, because if your books don't sell well, then you're not going to get another contract. So as I write books, I never want to be preachy with what I'm writing, but there will always be threads of faith in my stories because that is just how I see the world. And I never set out to have a particular theme in mind in my books, but God always shows up and he shows me what that is every single time. And it's so much fun for me to discover that as I'm going.
Yeah, I've noticed a common theme among even Christian fiction writers that their faith influences their writing, but then as they're writing, there are lessons that God teaches you in the process of writing that book. And I love the element of the storytelling because Jesus taught so much in parables. He taught through through stories, and sometimes we can understand concepts better through a story versus a book on that topic. And what are some of those lessons that you feel like God has really taught you through this process?
So in this one, it really came through in When the Day Comes, which is the first book in my Timeless series, and it's God's sovereignty. I think that for me anyway, in my personality, I am a very driven person. I get a goal in mind. I have a very clear vision. And it doesn't often turn out how I expect or how I planned.
Oh, you too.
In his heart, man plans his course, but God determines his steps. And I have to remind myself of that all the time. But ultimately, we don't always understand why God does what he does. Sometimes we do. And sometimes at the end, we can look back and see where his hand was guiding the entire time. And that's definitely one of the main themes in my life anyway, is always looking back and going, oh, okay, I see what, and now I'm in my mid 40s, and I would like to think that I, have that all figured out, but he's still showing me constantly. Yeah, right.
I was going to say, that's on tape now.
Right.
As soon as we think we have it figured out, it's like, oh, no.
Yep.
He'll come around with another lesson of that. Well, and you mentioned the God sovereignty in your first Timeless series. I will say it was very unique. I have never seen any other book where it's the same person in two time periods. So tell us a little bit about how you came up with this idea. And you can talk about the book, but we don't want to give too much away because we want them to read it. And that. But yeah, tell us a little bit about how you came up with that, because it's very unique. I've never seen that before.
It is a really unique premise. And so I had tried getting published with Bethany House, who is my publisher. I had submitted 6 books to them over the course of 6 years. And they kept saying to me, we love your writing. It fits in here. We just need a story to stand out. And of course, every author wants to find that story that stands out. And so I went through a lot of brainstorming, a lot of ideas. But one day I was just talking to my sister about the idea of time travel and how somebody usually falls through a portal of time, probably accidentally. Then they're in a different time trying to get back. But they might fall in love, or they might have to win a war or something. And then they're stuck between these two worlds, and they have to decide, do I want to stay or do I want to go back? And as I was thinking about that, an idea just literally hit me in the head. Like, what if you were born that way? What if you were born with 2 lives? You went to sleep in one, you woke up in the other, you went to sleep there, you woke up back in the first one. No time passes while you're gone. But on your 21st birthday, you have to choose which life to keep and which one to forfeit. And when that hit me, I instantly thought of Williamsburg, because I had been there that spring.
Oh, good.
And I'd tried getting there for years because I worked for the Minnesota Historical Society, and everybody has always said Colonial Williamsburg is the top-notch living history museum in the world. Yeah. So I had gone there, and I knew I wanted to set one of my timelines in Williamsburg in 1774. And so I thought, what would be another good juxtaposition? Like, what would be another timeline that would play well with that? And I had just watched a documentary by Elizabeth McGovern, who played Lady Grantham in Downton Abbey. And she was an American dollar princess. Yes. And the dollar princesses were women who were born to high society people, or I shouldn't say high society. They had a lot of money, but they weren't part of the old society. Yes. And so they basically married their daughters off to English aristocracy to gain titles and status. And so you've got one time period trying to fight against the American Revolution, or during the American Revolution, fighting against the British. And then in the other one, they're trying to buy back into the British aristocracy. And so I thought that would be such a perfect pairing. So that was kind of, where my idea came from and why I chose those 2 different eras.
Yeah, well, and obviously it stood out, and
Yeah,
Bethany House picked it up and said, okay, this is different. This one stands out. And I really did. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And as I mentioned to you before, I brought the book down into the restored area and looked around. And one of the things that I appreciated is at the end of the book, because I don't think we're going to really give anything away here, you mentioned that her 1774 character, her and her mother were based off of a real person here in Colonial Williamsburg. And I'd love for you to touch on her for a little bit.
Sure. So that's because of my love for telling real history. I always try to find a historical person that I can kind of reimagine their story. And so Clementina Rind was the first female public printer in Virginia. And she lived in Williamsburg in 1774. And her husband had been the public printer, and he passed away. So she then petitioned the Burgesses, the House of Burgesses, to be the printer. And there was 5 people who had petitioned, and it was actually George Washington who spoke up on her behalf. And so she became the first female printer, our public printer. And I just find that so fascinating. So in my story, Libby and her mother live in Williamsburg. Her father was a printer. He passed away. And so now her mother and her have gotten the printing contract. And so, inspired by her Clementina, but not retelling her story. Yeah. And I set it in the same house. And now the Parish Ludlow house, I think, something like that.
Yeah, I didn't double check. It might be.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and what I found was really fascinating, and this just happened to surprise me towards the end. I set them in that house, but then found out later that John D. Rockefeller, when he started purchasing property to establish Colonial Williamsburg, the Parish Ludlow house was the first house that he purchased. And that just happened to work really well with the story.
Yes, it did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's fun. I love putting real history in.
Yeah. And it was. I loved how I ended up. I was a little nervous there a couple of times. I was like, I don't know. I like this story, but I'm not so sure I like where some of this is going. And but I did. I loved the entire story. And like I said, I don't want to give too much away. But I did. And I am thoroughly looking forward to reading more in the series. And I imagine you had some other people that kind of encouraged you along the way. And I would love for you to share what are some of the things that people did and said to encourage you? Because with all the rejections, 6 books in 6 years, you're writing and you're writing and you're writing, and it doesn't look like you have much to show for it. By the world standards, if you've written 6 books and none of them are published, I can imagine getting a little discouraged.
Yes.
So what were some of those things that people did to encourage you along the way?
Sure. So, I look back even when I was younger, my parents homeschooled me, and my mom was always so good at recognizing gifts and talents in each of her children and then helping to foster those. And so she would bring me to our local county museum when I was just 11, 12 years old. So I could talk to the ladies there about our local history. And then and she is so proud of me. My parents are so proud. It's so sweet. They have all of my books are proudly displayed right there when you first walk in. And so that was, kind of where it started. And then when I was a junior in high school, my youth pastor was actually taking us to a Billy Graham crusade in the Twin Cities. We live in central Minnesota. And we stopped at just a random, fast food restaurant. And he was asking each of us what we wanted to do when we got older. And I said that I wanted to be a published author. And I will never forget, he took a receipt out of his pocket and he put it down and he said, "Can I be the first person to ask for your autograph?" And I just, and there was no, he was not teasing. He was not anything. He fully believed that I could do that. And I remember that. And I was able to dedicate a book to him. And I haven't seen him in probably 30 years, but that stood out to me. But I would say that the biggest support is for sure my husband and children. They, I did write 6 books that didn't get published, and it was not an easy time financially, but my husband had that dream for me too. And so he sacrificed so that we were able to allow me that time to pursue this dream. And I remember this one time, somebody in our community, I had little kids, and she had made some offhanded comment about, how maybe I shouldn't be pursuing this right now. I need to just focus all of my time on my family, which my family comes first, and they always are my priority. But I also felt this tugging in my heart that this was a time to go. And it bothered me so much. And my husband went to a thrift store. He knew that there was a desk at this thrift store. It was an antique desk, and we didn't have money to buy it. But he went and he purchased it. And he said, I don't care what anybody else has to say. You need to keep writing because God has a story in your heart. And that's, so those were just a few of the people who have really impacted my belief in myself. So.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I even got choked up on that one. That was so sweet. I was like, oh, that's beautiful. And sometimes people, I guess, well-meaning are just not very thoughtful. And I know I've spoken to some other women who kind of had that same debate. I feel like I'm really called. This isn't just a whim. This isn't just something I want to do for myself. I'm really feeling called and being prayerful about that. But then you do have your children, and they are first, but you're trying to balance the two, and it can be quite a bit of a tug of war with the mom guilt, because that is so real. The mom guilt is real. Yeah. And I've spoken to somebody else who said the lessons that her children learned, though, watching her go through that, were invaluable. And can you speak to some of that with your kids? Yeah. There is that tug, but then your kids watching you do that.
I'm actually getting goosebumps because I'm watching it now unfold in my children's lives. My oldest daughter is 20, and she is going into her second year of college, but she has some college credit from before. And the passion that she has, she would love to be a Foreign Service officer with the State Department, and someday would love to be Secretary of State. She is so driven. Okay. Her degree is history, politics, and economics with minors in biblical studies, journalism, and intercultural studies. This girl is so smart. And she just has this full confidence that she will, get to have this dream. And it's tempered with reality because she definitely saw my struggles, and so she knows that. But I just love, how many 20-year-old girls are out there saying, this is what I want and this is where I'm headed. I find that so amazing. Yeah. So it's so neat to see that in each of my children's lives in different ways playing out. And I'm there to encourage, I'm there to give advice and just to let them know that, hey, if God has put that dream in your heart, you go for it.
Yeah. Now, what were some of the practical ways that you kind of balance that in trying to be there for your family, but then also make sure you had time to write, because it does take time and there's only 24 hours in the day?
There is. So practical ways that I did that is my husband, again, being very supportive, so that's super helpful, is I would take my writing time, which was usually about 3 or 4 hours a day. And and I didn't have an office or anything. I had my little chair in the corner, and that was my time. And my husband was if he was home, he was very keen on telling the kids, mom's at work right now. You need to let mom be at work. And so it was compartmentalizing and saying, this is work time, as if I were leaving the house and going to a job. And now this is mom time. This is, and of course, if there were emergencies, I was always available. Yeah. But I think just putting a boundary on your time, setting a time, even if it's just 15 minutes that you have to give or 30 minutes, but putting a boundary on it and saying, this is my time and I will address whatever needs come later, was really important for me, at least.
Yeah, and it's tough to do, but you kind of have to put those boundaries. And I know some other women who are moms, and they're writing in car line, they're writing during doctor's appointments. They just find a way to squeeze in little pockets of time and then other big chunks as well. And I think I would sometimes tell my children, unless there's blood or fire, do not interrupt me.
Exactly.
And then, of course, there was the time that there was. So
right. Yeah.
So I stopped and we took care of the matter. So
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Well, you mentioned you have lots of them, and in the timeless, When the Day Comes is the first one, and you have two more that are already out, and a fourth one that's getting ready to come out.
Yeah.
So give us a little, you can tell us what the other ones are, and then let us look forward to the fourth one real quick.
So book 2 is called In This Moment, and there's actually, the heroine goes through 3 timelines, 1861, 1941, 2001. And then the second book is Identical Twin Sisters, and they go between 1692 and 1912. So they're during the Salem witch trials, which was really fascinating.
Wow.
And then so those 3 are out now, and book 4 comes out in November, and it's called Across the Ages, and it's my pirates and gangster book. So 1727 and 1927, and all of these are connected through family connections. So people ask if they could read them as standalones, and yes, you can. But if you would read like book 2 before book 1, there would be several spoilers that you would learn about in book 2. So they're best read in order. And this was just supposed to be a 3-book series, but it's been so well received that my publisher has now extended it officially to 7 books.
Oh,
so
7.
Yeah. And they're coming out every May and November, so every 6 months.
Oh my goodness. Wow. I'm just amazed, because talking to other people that have written books, that is very prolific.
It is, yes. And I have been writing for Love Inspired, contemporary romance, and guideposts, cozy mysteries. So I've been writing about 5 or 6 books a year. And so now I'm done with my cozy mysteries and my Love Inspired. So I will be doing 2 books a year for Bethany House. And so it's a little bit less for me, to manage.
You're almost slowing down at 2 books a year.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and the other books are shorter, so I could write, 2 contemporary Love Inspired would be the same length as 1 historical. So still writing, about the same amount, but just managing 2 books is way easier than managing 6.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, that just makes my head hurt thinking of trying to manage 6 books all at the same time. Like, oh, no, thank you. So, well, what would you say? I mean, you've had all this encouragement. You've learned so much through this journey. What would you say to encourage someone else to pursue the passion that God has placed in their heart?
I would say, be bold and fearless. Temper expectations with reality, because that's definitely there. But at the same time, just hold tight to your dream. And even if you're discouraged, or even if you're coming up against roadblocks, just know that it's not just about the final goal. It's about the journey that God is taking you on as you get there.
No, that's beautiful. And I think it's very wise, because we so often think, I'll be happy, or I will have made it when this happens. And either that doesn't happen, or then it does. And you go, now what?
Right. It's not quite what I thought it would be. And I think that that's part of that expectation piece, is we expect something, and then when we get there and it's not quite what we thought it would be, that's where our disappointment comes in. So, be hopeful, temper expectations, and just enjoy the journey as much as you can.
Oh, yes. And remember that God's in charge the whole time. Bringing it back to the sovereignty of God. Well, Gabrielle, it's very ingrained in me. Sorry.
That's okay.
How can people connect with you if they want to find out about this series, all the other series, and other books that you've written, and look forward to the next one coming out? What's the best way for them to connect with you?
So the best way would be to go to my website, which is GabrielleMeyer.com. And you can find all of my books there. You can find my newsletter. I only send out my newsletter when there's something fun to share. And you can also find my social media contacts there. So I'm on Facebook and Instagram fairly often, and probably too much. But a lot of people message me there, and I respond. So
okay.
That's where you find me.
Very good. Well, we will look forward to the new books. And thank you so much for spending the time to share with us and tell us about your journey and everything else. I really appreciate your taking the time to do that.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for joining me today on A Woman's Heart. I'm Lisa Granger. I hope you enjoyed the time with Gabrielle Meyer as much as I did. I encourage you to check out her time travel series along with more of her books. You can also catch up with her on social media. They are enjoyable reads for any time of the year. The show notes and the summer reading list are on my website, lisagranger.com.